GMT has announced a project called Fading Glory. Fading Glory is going to be the GMT edition of 4 victory point games in the Napoleonic 20 series. Napoleonic 20 is a series that, as the name says, of course, has to do with Napoleonic battles, but the 20 is because in each of these games there are only around 20 units on the board, in both sides, 20 units total. How cool is that? A very minimalistic approach to Napoleonic battles, definitely. So I was very curious about this. Interesting victory point design, GMT production values. I'd like to have a preview of that. How can I get a sense of how this part is going to be? Then I found a solution. I picked up C3I Magazine issue 23. C3I Magazine, you probably know it. It is a magazine that it's about all things GMT. Articles about GMT games, expansions, player rates, scenarios for GMT games. Very, very interesting stuff. If you like GMT games, each issue is really a nice bag of goodies. Well, in this issue, there is also a bonus game, a complete game, which is Jena 20. So I thought, oh, here we go. One of the Napoleonic 20 games republished in a GMT type of format. So this is going to give me a sense of what Fading Glory is going to be all about. I played it, and today I'm going to tell a little bit about it. This is the map. It is printed on paper. It is not too large, but I think it looks good, and it is definitely very easy to use, very functional. Important features on the map are Jena and Hassenhausen, which are axes that the French player is trying to defend and the Prussian player is trying to take control of, and Dornburg and Auerstadt, which on the contrary are areas that the Prussian player is trying to defend and the French player is trying to take control of. Because of this, the main areas of operations are going to be this one and this one, so they're like split into separate areas. And because of this, another important feature is going to be this road here, and to a lesser extent this road here too, which allow faster movement between the two main areas of operations. All initial units are set up in the left half of the map, so I can show you the setup a little more up close. And the first time you look at the map, you think, what? Is this a joke? Are you kidding me? There are only 3 French units on the map and so many more Prussian units. Some here kind of concentrated and ready to converge to attack the French units here, and 2 units here on that road that already seem to be ready to run to the right half of the map and to take control of the objective of Hassenhausen. It seems impossible for the French player. It seems completely out of balance. But it is not, because the Prussian units are definitely less powerful than the French unit. It is going to be a game of quality versus quantity. So trust me, during the game, the experience will be much more balanced than you could imagine from looking at this. And when you look at the turn track where you will place the reinforcements that will enter the game, it seems to confirm the idea that the French player is going to have a hard time, because there are so many more Prussian units there and so less French units ready to enter the game. However, as you look closer, you see that what is confirmed is actually the fact that the game is a game of quality versus quantity, because the French units are still much stronger. You see here combat factors of 5, 3, and 4 versus a standard combat factor of 2 for the Prussian units. The first thing that the active player does in a turn is to draw a random event card from this deck. Well, it is supposed to be a deck. You're supposed to make a deck out of this, but I just don't want to do it. I don't trust my manual skills enough to do it. I think I'm just going to ruin the thing. Maybe one day I'll make a photocopy and make a deck, but as of now I just use it as a random events table. I just roll 1d4, 1, 2, 3, 4 to determine the column, and then 1d6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, cross-reference, and I find out the random event for that turn. As you can see, several of these cards have 2 texts. One applies to the French player and one applies to the Prussian player, and these events can be reinforcements, morale goes up, morale goes down, other things happening, limitations to movement. It just adds a little bit of flavor and unpredictability. I like that. After the active player determines the random event for the turn, he can move any and all of his units up to the movement factor, which is the number on the right bottom corner. All hexes on the map cost 1 movement point to enter. However, if the player enters a forest hex or a rough terrain hex, then the unit has to stop immediately. If the unit uses road, then it can keep moving through rough and forest. Also, if a unit only uses road, gets a +1 movement point for that turn. An important factor that influences movement is the zones of control. The zones of control projected by the units will force enemy units entering the zone of control to stop, and even trickier, unless that unit is cavalry, the unit that enters an enemy zone of control cannot exit it. So it is very easy to get stuck in combat, and when infantry is stuck in combat, well, units have to keep firing at each other and fighting until one of them will run away, will retreat, and that unit may advance after combat. After the active player moves all of his units, then the non-active player has the opportunity of activating his cavalry units in what is called the enemy reaction phase. One of the things that the non-active player can do in this phase is to countercharge, that is, to use his cavalry units to attack enemy units, and with a huge bonus, which is to double the combat factor of that unit. So in this case, the French unit would have combat factor 2 versus 3 would be in disadvantage, but if this unit is countercharging during the enemy reaction phase, actually that combat factor is double, so now that unit is in advantage. You cannot do that when you are attacking with your cavalry during your regular turn, and also you cannot do it if you're countercharging enemy cavalry. Another thing that a non-active player can do is, instead of countercharging, disengaging. It seems like not much, just moving 1x away, but remember the units can do it, so it can be pretty good. After the enemy reaction phase, you have regular combat in which the active player must attack with all of his units that are in an enemy zone of control, and he must attack all units that are projecting a zone of control on his units. Also, the terrain in the X of the defender can give the defender a bonus, and there is a way in which morale can modify the situation, but I'll explain that later. Once you have the total modified combat strength of the attacker and the defender, you subtract the combat strength of the defender from that of the attacker, and this way you find the combat differential for that battle. Suppose the attacker has 5 and the defender has 2, then the combat differential is +3. You will use this column, roll a die, cross-reference, and then you have the result of the battle. And it might happen that the attacker or the defender breaks, which means that the breaking units are removed from the map and the overall morale of the army is reduced. It's pretty bad. You may be able to rally those units later, but still pretty bad. It may be that the attacker or the defender routes, which means that you will roll a die for all routing units and you will have to retreat them by the number of X's indicated by the die. If they move more than the regular combat, the movement factor, then you also have a loss in morale, so particularly bad. It may also be that they will be retreating through enemy zone of control, and that means that they have a chance of breaking. You will have to roll, and there's 50% chances they will break if they are retreating through an enemy zone of control. They may be withdrawing, again with the risk of breaking if they enter an enemy zone of control, or maybe nothing will happen, or maybe we'll have an exchange in which both sides will take some damage. An important factor in the game is morale, which is a form of currency that you can spend to receive several advantages and mainly to modify most of the things that I mentioned so far. For example, you can spend a point of morale to force marcher units, that gives them +1 movement allowance for that turn. You can spend a point of morale to commit the guard, which means you can use a particularly powerful elite unit to move next to an enemy during your movement phase. You can use a point of morale to commit the reserves, and that gives you +1 in combat strength for that battle. Or you can use a point of morale to rally your units. That means you will have a +1 die roll modifier when you are rolling to rally your units during your night turn. But be careful in the way you spend your morale, because your choices are not the only things that will affect the morale level of your army. Many other events will. For example, if you break an enemy unit, then your morale goes up, woohoo, and the enemy morale goes down by 1. But of course, the contrary is true. If one of your units breaks, then you lose morale and your opponent gains morale. If a unit routes more excess than its movement allowance, -1 morale, as I was saying earlier. If the guard is not successful in combat, -1 morale. If you take basically a turn of rest, +1. During night turns, if the enemy is occupying important access for you, such as your line of communication access or your objectives, then you lose morale. And also at night, you automatically recover some morale. Just because it's night, you take some rest. And budgeting your morale is kind of important, because if your morale goes down to 0, you lose the game immediately. So actually, it's probably the single most important thing in the game, to make sure that you inflict enough damage to the opponent's morale, that you preserve enough morale points. So as you can imagine, this creates very interesting situations and risk management challenges, because the point is really how many morale points you can afford to spend to get enough bonuses to do what you're trying to do before your morale allowance goes so low that then at that point the enemy may be able to inflict the final blow and just win the game that way. The game also has a couple of optional rules that will allow you to customize your experience. The most important optional rule is definitely the one that allows you to play the game with the counters face down. That creates a fog of war situation. But whether you're playing it with optional rules or just the basic version, I think that this is a very interesting game. It surprised me. I was expecting a filler or an introductory war game, and this game in a way is both and none. It is fast and easy to teach, just like a filler or an introductory war game. At the same time, is much more complex and rewarding than a filler, and I think that experienced war gamers also can have fun playing it more than when they're playing something that is simply introductory. It has balance between strategy and luck, which I think it's about right. Sure, there will be certain factors, cards or die rolls that can hurt you pretty badly, but if you retrace your steps, very often you see that the major factor was the way you budgeted your morale points. Probably if you were too liberal in your expenditures, then you put yourself in the situation where a card or a die roll can destroy you. But is that just luck? Not exactly. I like the fact that with just few units on the board, it's always clear to know exactly what's going on, what the options are. I can do A, B, or C. It doesn't mean that the making a choice is going to be easy. Some choices are going to be still very hard, but I like the fact that you don't have to spend time and energy figuring out what you can do. Is always very clearly in front of you. Similar to me is an advantage that this game has in the combat system. I like the differential combat strength in the combat system. Recently played games with the ratio of the odds in the combat system, and sometimes you just lose the sense of the big picture, just waste so much time figuring out how can I get that one unit in that place that will allow me to use the 3-to-1 column rather than the 2-to-1 column. Am I still there? How much do I need to get there? Here it's pretty clear. Oh, I have 3 here and my opponent has 4. I need 2. Now I have a better differential. It is that simple. You don't waste time in other ways. You can just concentrate on the strategy, on the game experience. It makes the game feel real fresh, tight, and it is fast-paced. It's just very engaging. So bottom line is that I'm very pleased I played this game. It made me even more excited now about Fading Glory, because I know it's going to be a nice system and it's going to have GMT quality of the components. As for Jena 20, it is not going to be included in the Fading Glory package, but if you want it, you can still get it in the C3I edition or in the Victory Point edition, and I suggest you give it a try. Who knows, maybe you will enjoy it as much as I did, and you will end up P500 in Fading Glory too.